Welcome, everyone. I am delighted today. We have Julie Charlestein, who, if people think back to the book that came out in our membership kits, they received them in August. And I see some names from our Next Gen Now Gen. So this book has been the subject of topic for that group for both January and February, and groups will be finishing up their discussion tomorrow. So very relevant and timely. As we talk today, I'm just going to be asking Julie questions, and anybody that would like to jump into the conversation and ask a question or clarify something, feel free. At the bottom, you'll see there's a Q&A. You can add your question there, or feel free to put it in chat. And Katie's helping me today, so as we go through questions, if something doesn't get answered, she'll help bring that one up for me, or hopefully I'll see it in chat. And we'll just keep a conversation going and make sure that hopefully everything gets answered by the time we're at the end. So Julie, I just want to set the stage. First of all, welcome, and I'm so glad that you're joining us today. Start, if you would, by just telling us a little bit about your family business. And I see that there's a picture in the background that maybe connects some dots on who were the key players way back then, over 100 years ago.
Well, thank you, Jane. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Our business is Premier Dental. We are inspired solutions for daily dentistry, which means that we develop, manufacture, and distribute innovative consumables for the oral health professional worldwide. So things that the dentist and hygienist use in your mouth. So hopefully when you go to the dentist, they're using Premier products. I am the fourth generation. You can see the image behind me. The gentleman on all the way to the left is my grandfather, Morton, who everyone used to call Mr. M. He was our second generation. Our founder was Julius Charlestein, my great-grandfather, which is why I am named Julie. He was a dental instrument sharpener. So like a laborer, believe it or not, dental instruments are still sharpened by hand today. And the story goes that he used to walk to and from work, and he would pass dental offices, and he asked his boss, hey, can I sell some of these instruments to the dental offices that I pass by? And that's how it started.
Okay. And one thing that I didn't have a sense of, so do you have siblings?
I do have siblings. I have
Okay.
one brother and one sister.
Okay. And did they end up taking a journey into the family business, or are they off doing other things?
They are doing other things.
Okay. So reading your book and knowing that you took a journey, at what point did it spark that the family business might be where I belong and where I want to go?
It was not until really later. It was, I had always obviously known about our business, and it was a source of pride and, something that was very interconnected in terms of kind of our identity and our family, but it wasn't ever anything I envisioned in terms of what I wanted to do as a career. So it was later after college and a few jobs. I think that I had come to work part-time at the company, and I said, okay, this is a little bit interesting. Let me, think about it a little more. And I decided, all right, well, maybe I should go to business school if I'm going to be in this business or other businesses.
Yes.
And then after I went to business school, I said, well, I should probably work somewhere else. I had worked other places after college, but I thought after my business degree, I should also work somewhere else. And then my father started calling me, what do you want to do? Things like that. And then I started research around business and family business. And then I decided to come into the fold. I should say, you asked about my siblings. My one brother does do some work for us, but it's not kind of like his main gig. So I certainly want to recognize what he does.
So how many employees do you guys currently have? And I know some of that changed during COVID, and we'll get to that piece. So if you want to give us a sense, maybe when you came into the business and maybe where you're at today.
Right now, I think we're at about 140 or so. Pre-COVID, I think we were probably at around 160, 165 in that realm.
Awesome. And so as you came into the family business, what was your first job? Where you were full-time and I'm going to make this my spot and my dad's here and I'm here.
Right. My first full-time job was I was a product manager.
Okay.
I was a product manager for the ultrasonic insert line. And ultrasonic inserts are these specific instruments that hygienists use to clean your teeth. And that was my first real full-time job in the company.
I think one of the things that strikes me from your book, and I think this is one of those very relatable pieces to a lot of the names that I see on the call today, is what did the conversation and what did the roadmap look like with you and your dad as you came into the family business?
The initial conversations were more exploratory.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, my father asking, what are you looking to do? What are your future plans? Would you want to come to Premier? Not necessarily with a specific roadmap of what would I do at Premier. So that was kind of like the first step. Then as I did more research around family business and our business, there were conversations around, okay, what would I do? What? Mm-hmm. And then that's when the conversations were around this product management. And the truth is, we really didn't get that much beyond that. There was not then a roadmap of this is what succession looks like. This is what ascension looks like. There actually wasn't any of that, which I wouldn't recommend. But that was, how it played out for us. So it was very much coming to a job, really. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I knew that there was something different there, but it wasn't, okay, I'm going to do this job for this amount of time. I'm going to have this kind of exposure and this kind of training and these types of internships within the organization. There wasn't anything like that.
Yeah. And how did the relationship change from you being outside of the business and having that family component to now you're working with your dad and finding that there's a difference in the family and the family business?
Initially, there wasn't really that much of a difference. We have a very close relationship and that maintained. There of course we're very different people. Mm-hmm. We have very different ideas. We lead very differently. So of course there were many instances over the many years where there were those disagreements, and I often had to lose them because I was not in charge. Mm-hmm. There are similarities with regular businesses and differences, obviously. But at least in our business, there certainly is a hierarchy in terms of roles. And I was not in that ultimate leadership position. So, when the boss has a mandate or a dictate, that is what gets deployed, not necessarily what I think should happen.
Yes.
So, that did not change the relationship, because that is an expected dynamic in any corporate job. At least to me it was, having come from others. I did not have the ultimate say.
What was the thing that started a succession conversation? Was he ready for that, or were you ready for it, or how did that come together?
It really came from him. We had a president that was not a family member who was looking to retire, and my father approached me and said, would he want me in that role? Would I want to be in that role? And I asked him to define that role, because at this point, I had the experiences of what you were talking about in terms of, conflict around leadership and strategies and things like that. And he told me that it would be a titular role. And I said, well, then I don't want it. So waited a little bit. I did not take that role when he wanted me to. Waited a little bit, probably around a year.
Okay.
And then I did step into that role. I still did not have ultimate authority. I was the president as opposed to the CEO. But I did have a little more kind of time under my belt for learnings.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I noticed as I was reading through the book, and I think this is going to be quite common for many of our companies, and even for as long as you guys had for history within the family business, the governance piece seems like a spot that really you decided to be a champion and try to develop that. What did it look like when you came in, and what pieces became important for you to try to set up within the family and the family business?
So there were certainly, documents. I guess you can, but I think it would be very challenging to get to a fourth generation without some sort of governance documents and legal documents. So we certainly had those. It was not a situation where there was nothing in place. They were just outdated. So I wanted to ensure that they were, more modernized, that they were taking advantage of whatever tax benefits were available, that they were really focused on the present and the future. So that's what I started to do.
Okay. And I get the sense that there wasn't an employment policy at the time, because it seems like you took a journey, then came in, but maybe didn't have a structured time frame. Is that something that you guys still haven't in terms of that open piece to it, or have you guys established anything? Because I know you have kids that potentially could come into the family business.
There is a loose employment policy in terms of who is entitled to work at the business and under what parameters.
Okay.
But there's certainly there is not a specified path in terms of, okay, they need to start in a managerial position or below, and they need to start in this section of the organization, and then they're going to have exposure to these parts of the organization. That we do not have.
Okay. And so as you look kind of back through the process of transition between you and your dad, what were the things that were most helpful in that process, and what things would have you done differently?
I probably would have done things differently in terms of a more specific roadmap. I think maybe in terms of more specific training in certain areas of the business and dedicated times in certain functions.
Okay.
I certainly had exposure and access to everything. But what I would have done differently, I would have spent a lot more in-depth time within certain functions, as opposed to really just being in my role, but because of being a family member, having access to other things. So I would have liked to have kind of developed my own, I think I said this before, my own kind of internships within the organization. I would have done that.
Okay. And in terms of communication with you and your dad, were there regular checkpoints, or at what did he kind of do a clean break, or how did you guys kind of figure out that kind of fine dance between him going off and doing something else and him still being involved in the business or not?
There were very specific dates put in legal documents. So once it was determined that I was going to become CEO, there was a whole nother set of negotiations and legal documentation and everything like that. So there was a legal date that was set. And once that date was set, to my father's credit, that was it. That was, I became CEO and he backed away. And I was very appreciative of that. And I'm sure, as you know, your members and participants know, that is not often the case. He was very, very generous with that.
Well, and I know that one of the things that kind of flagged as I was reading the book and thinking COVID was such a difficult time for everyone. And tell us a little bit about the tough decision that you had to make. And then it feels like your dad did a really good job of kind of saying a few things, but stepping back and letting you own the process.
Yeah, we all experienced COVID. It, was the worst. But it certainly was also a tremendous opportunity. So while it was horrible and very, very stressful, the outcomes turned out to be fantastic and gave us an even stronger business through the decisions and the strategies that we made and deployed. We have an even better, stronger business. And, in terms of my father, we fundamentally disagreed on how everything was handled during COVID. But again, because of the knowledge, the legal documentation, as well as the knowledge that these were not his decisions to make, I was able to make them, I guess I would say, unencumbered from an execution standpoint, not from an emotional standpoint, but in terms of, the business and the process. These were my difficult decisions to make, and I did.
Tell me a little bit about, and you touch on this in the book, culture, how you've been able to take the culture that probably was created with your great-grandpa, your grandpa, and then evolved with your dad. What does it look like today, and what pieces have you pulled through that you consider the family pieces?
For those of us that have, generational businesses, I think one of the reasons that they're able to sustain is because of the culture. So we have carried that culture forward. And I always laugh, culture has become such a buzzword, culture and entrepreneurship and everything like that. And I always say, those were things that we were deploying before anyone even, coined those terms. So, culture, the premier isms have not changed. That is ingrained within us, within the family, and within the larger company. And one of the things that we always say, my grandfather used to say this, I don't know if he got it from his father, is a part of you belongs to Premier. And that is something that everyone in the organization truly believes and feels empowered by. And that's something that, we continue to carry through every day.
That's awesome. I know one of the things that I kind of enjoyed reading about too is Cake Day.
Yeah, right. That was before me, but we do it.
Yeah. Well, and it's that little piece of remembering who you are, but yet celebrating the others that are part of the process as well. Do you guys have an advisory board or a board of directors and is it family or is it mixed with outside?
We actually have a real board. It used to be an advisory board. And then we had evolved to a board of directors. They're outside.
Tell us a little bit about that if you could, because that's been a topic that we've spent a lot of time this year. And I think in the first part of your book, I think you're talking about maybe your aunt was originally on it, your dad. So I didn't know if it was just family and then you guys evolved it from there, or if it had some independent individuals at that point, and if you've made a shift from that.
So originally when I came on, we did have a board, but it was really just kind of for signing things. It was my father, my aunt, and my grandfather. And then I realized, the importance of a board. So I brought on an advisory board, so it was an advisory board, all independent members, all with different pieces of expertise. some that had run large family businesses and actually sold them, one that had run one of the largest regional accounting firms, one that had run a public company and did M&A, one that was in our industry and was a competitor at one point. So it was important for me, for my development, and also for my father to see outside perspectives, that, things weren't necessarily only coming from me, that others had these points of view, or that they had a point of view that was supportive of whatever my father's area would be, but that it was, a place for, again, different perspectives, insights, and experiences. And as we've grown and become more sophisticated, it was important that the advisory board turned into a regular board of directors.
Okay, and we have actually a specific question about that. The question is, how do you select your individuals or your independent individuals? What are their core competencies that they need? And how do you assess their effectiveness?
I looked at it in terms of the areas of what holistically made up our organization, and who would have skill sets within those to give me guidance. So, for example, I wanted someone very strong financially, so that's why it was important to me to bring someone in that had led these accounting firms. I wanted someone that had experience in M&A, so that's why I sought that person out. Obviously, family business was important to have that perspective. So I had some ideas of the types of skills that I wanted, and then from there I sought out people that had those, and then I also sought out some recommendations. There are companies and organizations that will place board members. So if you don't know of people on your own, there are certainly these firms that will help you and guide you to place board members.
And that's actually something we're doing here at our center, is kind of helping find some of those unique talents and unique skills that maybe don't exist in our state, but there's a whole big network in terms of being able to do that. So thanks for sharing that. I have another question that came in, and this, I thought you did a great job talking about in the book as well. And it is, how do you keep from taking on too many jobs and becoming overworked or buried in the jobs that need to be done?
I don't know that I've always been able to do that very successfully. That's my personality. But as my roles have changed, so I started as a product manager, then I became responsible for product management, then I did business development, then I became president, now I'm CEO. So within each role, I was able to shed areas of responsibility while gaining others, and that helped to delineate. There will always be times, that I'm overwhelmed, and sometimes where I need to sit back and really understand, okay, what are things that I am uniquely qualified to do, and everything else I should not be doing. That is in my role now as CEO. That was not my role otherwise. And I don't think that I had the strength or the fortitude to think like that until I was in the CEO role. And by the way, probably a few years into that role to be able to make that solid statement for myself. And then that also comes into, organizational structure and the type of people that I have chosen to hire.
Well, if I remember right, you made some significant changes in the overall structure. Remember, there's a piece in the book that talks about, I think it was your admin printing out the old chart and then going to print out the new one, and it's taking legal paper to do that. One piece I love too, and it kind of reflects to what you just said about picking people. It feels like you were very intentional when you knew that you were losing some key talent, based off of years of service. I think there was a gentleman that had been with you guys for like 30 years and was looking to retire. Talk a little bit about how you decided to seek out some individuals to fill some key places. And it feels like at that time too, not everybody was in agreement on your team.
Yeah, I mean, organizational structure to me is foundational for the success of an organization. And what you were talking about is we had a very long-term sales leader who I loved, was a mentor. Everyone in the industry had known him, and he was very generous in giving us a lot of notice in terms of his retirement. But I knew that I wanted to take the company in a very specific direction. And for that, I wanted a very specific type of person. And I wasn't finding that. And the time was getting closer and closer to this gentleman's retirement. But I wasn't, and I did have a few opportunities to hire other people that I guess I would say were more traditional sales leaders. And I did find myself at times succumbing to the weaker, easier option to say, okay, they'll be really good. You know, they'll be really good. They might not be able to do exactly what I'm thinking, but they'll be really good. And I'm glad that I didn't do that. Like, it went pretty far in some cases. Like, I think I'm trying to remember, like, I think I even made an offer, or was like negotiating terms before an offer. So I'm glad that I didn't do that, because I had a very clear vision for the company. And a lot of it stemmed from who this person was going to be. So I stuck with my path. I found someone on my own. The recruiter had not been able to find anyone after months and months and months. I found someone on LinkedIn. Everyone in the organization, including the gentleman who this person would be succeeding, thought I was absolutely bonkers. And I was like, you know, I don't often veto things, but I was like, well, you know, trust me, you're gonna love her. But I didn't say this out loud. I was like, but I'm totally hiring her anyway. And I did, and it's been fantastic.
Well, and I feel like at that point too, some of your shift was already going towards where the company had been to being more analytical about the approaches. And she seemed to bring in that skill set that was kind of going to set the tone for, as you were looking ahead and kind of the direction that would happen. So
yes, the direction and the strategy and the vision for when I became CEO, even a little bit before, was very data driven. In all the areas that data touches. And so that was an integral and really vital role to be able to achieve that.
We had a question come in, and it's pertaining again to this organizational structure. The question is, how did you go about designing it?
It actually happened over years. And again, trying to think about what is the vision and what roles do I need in order to achieve that. And it really just starts with a piece of paper. You know, what am I trying to accomplish here, and what roles do I need to do it? And the piece of paper is not the existing org chart. The piece of paper is a blank piece of paper. And, you know, it doesn't have anyone's names or anyone's functions or anything that exists right now. And those things eventually get fit in. And, you know, I made some mistakes. I hired some roles where I was like, you know what, I really didn't need those roles. And it's not, I think I say this in the book, like, it's a breakup. It's not you, it's me. There was nothing wrong with these people or with their skill set. I had not been thorough enough in the functionality of what I was looking for those roles, or for if those were the right roles at all. And then that kept evolving. But the thing that I always think about is strategy needs to meet structure, and structure needs to meet strategy. Those are the things that I am constantly thinking of when I look at the organization.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of rewind and touch back to a point that I think oftentimes in a family business gets overlooked. And I admire your dad and for your ability to put it in the book. And it was that feeling like he felt obligated to come into the family business. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that came out in your guys' conversations?
Know that it came out in our conversations. It was just kind of an obvious known thing. My father is, the intent was for him to always go in the business. My father is very, very smart. He went to Wharton. He was on his way to Columbia Business School. While he was a teenager and at Wharton, he became more involved Judaically. And in youth movements and leadership and things like that, and more observant. And he decided while he was at Wharton that he was going to become a rabbi as opposed to going to business school.
Okay.
So he did that. Apparently not everyone was too excited about it. The chosen child is now not coming into the business. Well, is not going to business school or coming into the business. He's becoming a rabbi. Like, who needs that? But that's what he did. And he had a congregation. He was a pulpit rabbi until I was probably around 5 or 6, and then I think it was, I don't know this for a fact, I think it was like a group decision that he would come into the business at that point between my grandfather, my grandmother, my mother, and he came into the business at that point. He was a very, in addition to being very smart, very bright, very capable of doing the job, he was also a very loving and respectful son. And he wanted to please his father and do what his father wanted. So he came into the business.
And as you grew up and your siblings grew up, then did you see a sense of him drawing you guys to the family business or discouraging you from the family business, or neither one of those?
I would say it was pretty neutral. There was never an expectation that we go into the business. I remember when I was working there part-time and I said, if I'm going to work here, I think I should go to business school so that I can kind of learn more. And his response was, well, don't you really like art history? Why don't you go to graduate school for that? And I said, well, thank you for agreeing to, bankroll my interests. But if ultimately I'm going to be here, I think I need, more education and more experience. So it certainly wasn't like, these need to be your next steps in order to come here. He was always very much, not even encouraging us to explore what we want to do. There was it wasn't really even a conversation. Whatever you want to do is fine. It only came later after I had graduated graduate school and was somewhere else that he was asking, are you going to come to Premier?
Okay. We had a question that's going to kind of put us back into this when you were selecting roles and some comments you made earlier. How do you evaluate a bad fit for a role versus a bad role?
I always look at cultural fit. First, I try and devise the role as tightly as I can beforehand. And like I said, I have gotten it wrong before. So I try to devise the role tightly, and then that decision is kind of made. And then I look at the person. Obviously, they have to have the right skill set, etc. But I will always choose cultural fit over skill set. So that's how I go about it. And yes, sometimes I have had a few roles that were not right roles. And also, by the way, the people weren't, if the people were amazing, I would be like, okay, well, let me figure out where they should be because they're so good. I just didn't do the design properly. There's certainly always opportunities for that. That has not been my experience.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that. So you've got a long ways to go yet, but up to this point, what would you consider your greatest accomplishment?
I think all of the different transitions
Mhm.
have been an accomplishment. The ability to come into an organization and learn and get to different levels. I think that in and of itself has been an accomplishment. And I think to really have a team that is able to grow this business and be excited and energized and dedicated to its continued success.
And what do you look most forward to from the spot you're sitting in right now? What are you most excited about for the future?
I always say one of my favorite sayings is actually a Gatorade commercial from many years ago, which is to start a revolution, the only solution evolve. So we're always thinking about what's that next evolutionary move. And it doesn't necessarily need to be revolutionary. It can be, again, evolutionary, it can be iterative. So watching each element of our strategy really evolve into success.
What motivated you to write the book?
It was not ever something that I wanted to do. Forget about thought about doing. It wasn't like, oh my God, I want to be an author, but I don't have any time. It did not even, it crossed my mind as much as my becoming a neurologist or something like that. Like,
Did you have a journal that you kind of reflected back, or you kind of
No,
just sat down and
nothing.
started the process?
No, I didn't do any of those things. I was working with a PR firm on executive positioning. So obviously there are a lot of dental companies. They have a lot of great products, but none of them have CEOs that look or act like me. So I said, okay, is there a way to leverage me to get exposure for Premier? So I hired an agency to work on with executive positioning with me for that. And one day I was at their Manhattan offices and they were, this is this section, this is our, this is the PR, this is the advertising, whatever, this is our book section. And I said, a little insight about me, one of my vices is the Real Housewives of any city. And I just said, I'm like, oh, I can write a book. I love the Real Housewives and all of those people are idiots and they all write books. And they're like, you should write a book. I was like, I am totally kidding.
You
am
set
not
the bar really high on that one.
I was like, I am not writing a book. I am here because I have a day job. They're like, you should really write something. So anyway, I said no. Then they set up a meeting and the people on the other end of the phone were telling me how I shouldn't write a book. I was like, well, I don't know who put this phone call together because, yeah, I'm not writing a book. And they said, well, you should write something down so we can take a look at it. So I wrote a few things and they said, you actually have something here. And then that's how it started.
And did you run this by your family, or what was their reaction through this process?
I didn't run it by the family because I didn't know. I'm not an author. I mean, technically I am an author, but I know nothing about book writing or the industry or anything like that. So I didn't know I had no expectation. What is this going to be? I don't know. Yeah. So I only told them like after like a publisher bought it. I was like, hi, I wrote a book and someone bought it. It's going to be a book. And they were like, what? I was like, yeah, isn't that crazy?
Well, any of you found family businesses reaching out to you then, or people like us that become part of the conversation?
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as you think about the best things and the worst things about being part of a family business, what's the best thing? What's the worst thing?
There are a lot of each. I think the best thing is the ability to be a part of a legacy and be a part of creating a future. That's a very unique position to be able to be in. And some of the worst things is, it can change dynamics. It can change dynamics. But everything is, everything can be managed in certain ways. But I think one of the biggest challenges, and I don't think that this is unique to family businesses, is when you get to a leadership position, it's very difficult. It's an unbelievable privilege. It's an unbelievable privilege, and one that I would not change. But when you are CEO, it's, they say this, it's a lot, it's a lot. And so learning to navigate that, I would not say is a worse thing, but I would certainly say is a challenge, but one, again, that I am very privileged to be able to meet.
That's awesome. I have a question that came in, and it says, you've talked about building structures within the business to support you. What recommendations do you have for building support structures outside of work?
So I think it's very important, especially regarding what we were just talking about in terms of, the responsibilities that come with leadership. So it was I'm part of YPO. I'm sure your members have heard of that, Young Presidents Organization, part of a forum, which is very important. So that to me was really instrumental in both my professional and personal development. So some kind of peer group. Also, actually, the advisory and now board of directors, even though it's within the business, is also very, very helpful. Also, I'm a fan of therapy when needed, whatever structure, and friends, if you just having dinner with some girlfriends makes a big difference. Even I have, some of my friends don't work. Some of my friends are doctors, they're not necessarily having, common experiences career-wise, but having those different outlets are very important.
Well, and I get the sense that you have a husband that's very supportive in terms of
Yes.
he gets you and how you may work on vacation, even though it's vacation.
Right. Yes. My husband is amazing. And that, of course, is if you're, privileged enough to have a spouse that you have a good relationship with, I would definitely take advantage of that.
So here's a question, just thinking through, again, emerging from the generations before you. What's the point that you realized that you had emerged from the previous generation's shadow, kind of created your own light?
My grandfather turned 90. My grandfather has passed away, but at my grandfather's 90th birthday, we were having a huge celebration, a very big industry celebration. And I really hadn't thought, my father had asked me to plan it, which I of course did. But then my father asked me to be the MC, which I hadn't. I was like, okay. I hadn't really given much thought to it. And at that point, at that event, I realized that I was kind of creating my own reputation.
Yeah, that's a little surreal.
Yeah.
With him celebrating and then having the generations there. Is there a book that you would recommend that's been instrumental in shaping you and that balance of family, business, and family?
Well, I of course read, the great business books from Good to Great. I think the one after that is Great by Choice. Also an amazing book not necessarily family business related, is Never Split the Difference. That has to do with negotiation by Chris Voss. Another book that I really, really liked is called The Trust. It's about the family of the New York Times family.
Okay.
Those are some, business related books that I've appreciated.
And then in your book.
And then also a lot of Clayton Christensen's books I think are excellent.
Thanks for sharing. In your book, you reflect almost on every chapter, a quote that's kind of at the end. Which one do you live by? What's the one that you carry with you every day?
What I carry with me every day is one of Mr. M, Grandpa's Mortonisms, which is remember who you are.
I love it. That's awesome. So it's about quarter to one. We still have some time for questions if people want to drop those in. Let's talk about your future plans. What are you thinking about for succession?
My kids are 21 and 18. Neither of which have any interest in the business, which is fine because neither did I. So there are certainly mechanisms for succession, but I am not looking right now to groom either one of my children for that. I've certainly seen, I brought in a president who is not a family member. So we have done that in the past. So I certainly know that the business can continue very successfully without family leadership.
And are there some things as your kids have grown up that you've done to at least give them the history and some exposure and some identity that the family business could be an option for them?
They know a lot about it. It's who I am. It's kind of like, oh, Mama has curly hair and she works at Premier. Like it's not, it's kind of like, just part of who I am, and it's part of who they are. Kind of similarly to how I was explaining how I grew up. It's certainly not something I don't believe that they think that they're going to be doing, but that they have a deep sense of pride in. And we talk a lot. I was very close with my grandparents, so I talk a lot about them, business or otherwise. And they certainly see my father's involvement. So while it's not a specific roadmap with guidance or even suggestion, they certainly recognize its value. And there's no, from their side also, they do not have, well, I don't have an expectation for them to join. They don't have an expectation of entitlement. Which is very important. So they're not looking at their lives and their career trajectories to say, well, okay, I'm going to try this. And if it doesn't work, I can always come to Premier. That is not a mentality that is accepted or that they have.
Good points. Have there been any interest from cousins of coming in? Have you had to entertain that at all?
No, there have not been.
Okay. So at the end of your book, you have the big takeaways, and you've got 13 real world tips to help run your family business better. Name a couple or talk about a couple that really ended up being instrumental to you. See, I'm testing your memory now in your book.
Oh my God, I don't remember what they are. Because I don't think about, the lists, but I think, I think some of it was probably around, authenticity in leadership and as much transparency as possible. Obviously, in the roles that we're in, that's not going to be something that's always available. But I try to lead and again, it's another buzzword, as authentically as possible. And while maybe not as transparently, maybe not with complete transparency, because you can't do that, but at least with vision and understanding as to why we're doing what we're doing.
Well, and I know I just flipped to it, and it's like one that I think if you can comment a little bit, I know this piece gets carried in and has been a little bit of conversation with our next gens, and that idea that resentment sucks. And kind of
Yes.
that carrying, is that something you guys had to deal with at all in your family business? And did your dad have siblings that either chose or?
My father has a sister who was not interested in coming into the business. And I also think, generationally, her mindset today might have been different. Like, yes, I would have come into the family business, but when she was looking at careers, women typically were teachers or nurses or something like that, even though, it's certainly something that she could have done. It was not something that was within her frame of reference. So I would say resentment maybe was more something that I had dealt with as opposed to a familial function. And I'm not sure if I say this in the book, but someone, I don't know if I read it or heard it or someone pointed out to me, resentment is like you drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So it's, very, very dangerous and toxic. So it's something that that's worth working on.
Another thing that you mentioned in your book, and I loved it, and it was question of the day that you kind of used in a lot of your meetings. And then you kind of had the drawback to the reality shows that you like. So we're going to do one of those questions. Has the people that are seated at your table changed? And talk a little bit about who you chose to have seated at your table.
Have the people seated at my table changed?
We had a lot of reality stars.
Right, no, I know who they are. So the people that were at my table were David Ben-Gurion, will.i.am, Diane von Furstenberg, my grandparents.
Which I'd love to be invited to this dinner.
And I'm not sure, did I say Clayton Christensen? Have the people changed? Not yet.
Okay. And why did you pick the mix that you picked?
I picked Clayton Christensen because I really find his insight around innovation to be very sharp. And it was very influential at a time when I was thinking about ideas very differently from others around me. And I found that to be very, very influential. So that's why I chose him. I chose Diane von Furstenberg because of her singular legacy. This is one woman that was both entrepreneurial and able to create within one generation an enormous, influential and evolving brand. And there were a lot of similarities in terms of her personal definitions, in terms of her saying, I don't know what I want to be, but I know who I want to be. And that very much resonated and continues to resonate with me. will.i.am is just, to me, a real innovator and kind of Renaissance man in random ways. David Ben-Gurion is very important to me. I am a Zionist, and the state of Israel is very important. So of course, being the first prime minister, and also in terms of leadership and vision, having the fortitude to create a state when you're faced with, at the time, everything that he was faced with unfortunately we see is no different than now. And having the conviction and the determination and the vision to do it, knowing what is right to do and that it must be done. That to me is very compelling. Obviously, I'm not a world leader, but just in terms of leadership, knowing, having the confidence to know what you need to do and to do it. And of course, you know, my grandparents, because they were just phenomenal.
Great answer. So many of the people that are on this Zoom today are walking through very similar footsteps as you. And you've kind of reached that point where many of them are looking to be CEO or to lead in a key leadership role. What's your advice?
Yeah. There, you know, you need to do a lot of work. There's no like one piece of advice. You need to do a lot of work. You need to do a lot of research. You need to do a lot of soul searching. You need to talk to a lot of people. If you want to get there, you'll get there, but it's not, you know, you got to do the work.
And what do you wish you would have known then that you learned now, or in the spot that you're in now?
I don't know. I think that I would want to have had the points of ignorance and naivete that I did. I think it's important to have those experiences in the time that you have them, with the knowledge that you have at the time.
That's awesome. I also get a sense from your book of be open to change. And maybe you didn't always have that mentality, but you certainly were able to flow through a lot of different transitions. And then when COVID hit, it feels like you were also able to make some huge changes that, as you pointed out earlier, ended up paying some big dividends in terms of restructuring and how you guys are evolving from it. But that's not easy to do.
Yeah, you have to be open to change.
Yeah.
And in every element of your life, whether you're running a business or not. Because everything, what is it? The only constant is change.
Change, yes. So. Awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap up. Just one fun question for the end of when you're not at work. What do you like to do?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out. I work a lot. I gotta figure out some hobbies. Obviously, spending time with my family, but no, there's not one. I'm not like a passionate fisherman or anything like that.
Well, and if I remember, is your son in the service?
Yes.
So thank you to him for his service.
He's in the IDF, so it's not this country, but but he is serving.
Yeah, that's awesome though. So thank you so much for taking time today, and thanks for sharing with our families. I know that through your book and through this, there's been a lot of discussion, and know that you've offered a lot of value to families in having those discussions and shaping their family businesses. So thank you so much,
for having me. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.